The scent hit me first, a familiar floral note that always clung to her hair, now lingering in my boss's private office. It wasn't just a trace, it was an announcement, a silent, insidious whisper that tore through the carefully constructed facade of my life. My hand, already reaching for the doorknob, froze midair, suspended in a moment that felt both eternal and fleeting. A cold dread, unlike anything I'd ever known, began to spread through my chest, tightening its grip with each beat of my suddenly erratic heart. It was the kind of visceral shock that steals your breath, blurs your vision, and makes the world tilt on its axis, leaving you grasping for something solid that no longer exists. My name is Alex. For the better part of 15 years, I'd poured every ounce of my ambition, intellect, and relentless dedication into Sterling & Co.'s. I'd started as a wide-eyed junior analyst, fresh out of business school, and clawed my way up the corporate ladder, rung by arduous rung, to senior vice president. This wasn't merely a career, it was the very cornerstone of the future I envisioned, a legacy I was meticulously building, brick by painstaking brick, for my wife, Sarah, and for us. We had what I genuinely believed was the perfect life, a beautiful, sun-drenched home nestled in the affluent suburbs, spontaneous weekend getaways to the coast, and the kind of comfortable, unspoken understanding that only years of shared laughter, quiet support, and profound mutual respect can forge. We were a team, a partnership, an unbreakable unit, or so I thought. Richard Thorne, my boss, was more than just the CEO. He was a mentor, a formidable leader, and, I thought, a genuine friend. We'd shared countless late-night strategy sessions, celebrated monumental corporate victories with expensive champagne, and even commiserated over the occasional personal setback, exchanging knowing glances over the rim of a whiskey glass. He was the kind of man you looked up to, a titan in the industry, whose approval I valued deeply, whose trust I believed I had earned. Sarah, a brilliant and driven architect, often had demanding hours, her projects consuming her evenings, and our schedules rarely aligned perfectly. But we always made it work, always found time for each other, always prioritized us. Or so I had naively, completely, and utterly believed until that Tuesday. It was a Tuesday, the kind of dreary, overcast afternoon that usually made me long for the weekend, for the simple comfort of home. Richard had called me into his office, ostensibly to finalize the intricate details of the upcoming merger, a colossal deal I had personally spearheaded for months, pouring my soul into every negotiation, every clause. His door, usually kept meticulously closed, a symbol of his privacy and authority, was ajar, a sliver of light and sound escaping into the hushed, almost reverent corridor. As I approached, my mind still replaying the complex clauses of the merger agreement, I heard it. A faint murmur, then a soft, almost intimate laugh. It wasn't Richard's usual booming, confident chuckle. This was softer, more private, laced with an unfamiliar warmth that sent a shiver down my spine. I paused, my hand hovering inches from the polished oak, a sudden, inexplicable hesitation gripping me. The floral scent, now undeniably stronger, thicker in the air, pulled me in, a siren call to a truth I wasn't ready to face, a truth that felt like a physical blow. I pushed the door open, just enough to peek through the narrow gap. Richard was at his expansive mahogany desk, his back partially turned towards me, seemingly engrossed in a document. But draped casually, almost carelessly, over the arm of his executive chair, a chair I had sat in countless times, discussing strategies, sharing ambitions, was a silk scarf. Sarah's scarf, the one I'd painstakingly chosen for her anniversary, a delicate blend of sapphire and emerald hues that perfectly matched her striking eyes. My breath hitched, a sharp, painful gasp trapped in my throat, burning like acid. My eyes, now wide and unblinking, scanned the room, searching, denying, then confirming with a brutal finality. And then I saw it, a small silver locket, half hidden beneath a stack of financial reports on his side table, glinting faintly in the subdued office light. It was the locket I'd given Sarah on our wedding day, a cherished heirloom engraved with our intertwined initials, a symbol of our eternal bond. It was unmistakable. In that single, agonizing moment, my entire world, meticulously constructed over years of effort, trust, and love, began to fracture, to splinter into a million irreparable pieces, each shard reflecting a distorted image of my shattered reality. It wasn't a suspicion anymore. It was a cold, brutal, undeniable fact, staring me in the face with a cruel, mocking clarity that threatened to consume me whole. A primal scream, raw and guttural, clawed at the back of my throat, threatening to erupt, to shatter the corporate silence. But no sound escaped. My jaw tightened, clenching so hard I felt a tremor run through my temples, a dull ache beginning behind my eyes. My knuckles, white and strained, gripped the doorknob as if it were the last anchor in a raging storm, the only thing keeping me from being swept away. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to burst in, to unleash the torrent of fury, the agonizing pain, the utter devastation that was consuming me from the inside out, to confront them, to demand answers, to tear down everything in a blaze of righteous anger. But I didn't. The years of rigorous corporate training, of maintaining an impenetrable composure under the most intense pressure, of strategic thinking that prioritized logic over raw, destructive emotion, all of it kicked in, a cold, hard mechanism overriding the chaos, a dam holding back the flood. I pulled my hand back, slowly, deliberately, silently, as if moving through thick, resistant water. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, deafening drumbeat against the sudden, terrifying silence that had descended upon my mind, a silence more profound than any sound. I took a deep, shaky breath, forcing the air into my burning lungs, trying to quell the rising tide of nausea, the dizzying sensation that the floor beneath me was giving way. My vision blurred for a second, the edges of the room swimming in a haze of unshed tears, then sharpened with an almost terrifying, predatory clarity. I saw the room again, not as a scene of intimate betrayal, but as a vast, intricate chessboard, every piece now imbued with a new, dangerous significance. The pieces were laid out, and I had just been dealt a devastating, unexpected blow. But the game, I realized with a chilling certainty that settled deep in my bones, wasn't over. Not yet. I straightened my tie, adjusted my expression into a mask of professional neutrality, a facade so perfect it could win awards, and then, with a resolve that surprised even myself, a cold, steel-like determination, I knocked firmly on the door. Richard looked up from his papers, a slight, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips, completely oblivious to the earthquake that had just ripped through my world, to the silent war that had just begun. "Alex, come in," he said, his voice calm, inviting, utterly devoid of any hint of guilt, gesturing to the plush leather chair opposite him. I walked in, my steps measured, my posture erect, my gaze unwavering, and sat down. I looked him dead in the eye, a silent promise forming in the depths of my soul, a vow etched in ice. My mind, now eerily calm, detached from the emotional wreckage, was already racing, calculating, planning, mapping out a future he couldn't possibly foresee, a future where the rules of the game were about to change drastically. That's when I realized I didn't lose her. They lost me, and the price for that loss would be far higher than they could ever imagine. If you've ever faced a moment where your entire world shattered and you had to decide whether to crumble or fight back, then you understand the profound weight of that choice. This is just the beginning. Make sure you're subscribed to follow this journey and see how the game truly unfolds. I walked out of Richard's office that afternoon, the scent of Sarah's perfume still clinging to my senses like a phantom limb, and returned to my own, a floor below. The world outside the glass walls of my office seemed to hum with an unsettling normalcy. Colleagues bustled past, their faces etched with the familiar anxieties of deadlines and corporate ambitions, completely oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred within me. I sat at my desk, the glow of my monitor reflecting a face that, to any casual observer, would have appeared perfectly composed, perhaps a little tired, but otherwise unchanged. Inside, however, a maelstrom raged. The initial shock had receded, replaced by a cold, hard knot of something far more dangerous, a quiet, simmering rage that felt less like an explosion and more like a slow, deliberate freeze. My hands, which had trembled uncontrollably just moments before, were now steady as I typed out an email, a mundane response to a vendor query, the words forming with an almost mechanical precision. This was the first test of my new reality. Could I wear the mask? Could I play the part of the unsuspecting husband, the loyal second-in-command, while my world crumbled around me? The answer, I discovered with a chilling clarity, was yes, I could, and I would. The evenings became a masterclass in deception. Sarah would come home, her usual vibrant energy a little muted, a little more distant. We'd share dinner, discuss our days with practiced ease, the rhythm of our conversations a familiar dance of superficiality. But now, every word she spoke was filtered through a new lens, every gesture scrutinized. I noticed the subtle shifts, the way her eyes would dart away when I asked about her day, the almost imperceptible hesitation before she answered a direct question, the sudden, inexplicable late nights at the office that had become more frequent. She'd claim project deadlines, client emergencies, the usual corporate jargon that I, as an executive, understood all too well. But now, the words rang hollow, each excuse a tiny, almost invisible crack in the foundation of our trust. One evening, she mentioned a new restaurant Richard had recommended, a small exclusive place downtown. Her voice was too casual, her smile a fraction too wide. I remembered Richard mentioning it to me weeks ago, a place he'd discovered with his wife. The pieces, small and seemingly insignificant on their own, were beginning to coalesce, forming a mosaic of betrayal that was both horrifying and undeniably clear. I'd watch her as she slept, her face serene in the moonlight, and a profound sadness would wash over me, quickly followed by a cold, analytical detachment. This wasn't the woman I married, or perhaps she always was, and I was simply too blind, too trusting to see. My anger, initially a searing inferno, began to transform. It wasn't the kind of anger that demanded immediate, explosive confrontation. That, I realized, was what they expected. That was the emotional, predictable response of a man scorned. But I wasn't just a man. I was a strategist, a negotiator, a problem solver who thrived in high-stakes environments. My years in the corporate world had taught me that true power lay not in emotional outbursts, but in calculated moves, in understanding the vulnerabilities of your opponent, and in striking when they least expected it. The raw pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath the surface, but it was now a fuel, an engine driving a new, terrifying purpose. I began to see my life, my marriage, my career, not as a personal tragedy, but as a complex corporate takeover, a hostile acquisition where I was the target, and I needed to turn the tables. My mind, usually occupied with market trends and quarterly reports, now meticulously dissected their every move, every interaction, searching for patterns, for weaknesses, for the leverage I would inevitably need. The game had changed, and I was no longer a player. I was the architect of a new reality, one they wouldn't see coming. My plan began subtly, almost imperceptibly. I started by adjusting my schedule, arriving earlier, leaving later, often lingering in the office after everyone else had gone home, not to work, but to observe. I noticed the security camera blind spots, the times when the cleaning crew made their rounds, the specific patterns of the IT department's system maintenance. I began to pay closer attention to the company's internal network, the access logs, the digital footprints left by every employee. As a senior VP, I had a certain level of administrative access, a privilege I had always used responsibly, for legitimate business purposes. Now it became my weapon. I started cross-referencing Richard's travel schedule with Sarah's late nights. The coincidences were too frequent, too precise to be accidental. A conference in Chicago for Richard would often align with Sarah's sudden need to work remotely from a hotel for a major client presentation. The lies, once so convincing, now unraveled before my analytical gaze, each thread pulled taut, revealing the ugly tapestry beneath. I also began to cultivate relationships with key personnel, the quiet, unassuming individuals in IT, HR, and accounting, people who held the keys to various digital and administrative kingdoms. A casual conversation over coffee, a shared frustration about a bureaucratic hurdle, a subtle offer of assistance. These were the small, intelligent actions that began to build a network of unwitting allies, people who would, unknowingly, provide me with the pieces I needed. I wasn't looking for direct evidence yet. I was building a comprehensive profile, a digital dossier of their deception, a silent accumulation of facts that would eventually become an undeniable truth. The real shift, the moment the game truly began to turn, happened late one Tuesday night. Sarah was asleep beside me, her breathing even and deep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house amplifying the frantic calculations in my mind. I'd spent weeks observing, analyzing, gathering the peripheral data. It was time for a more direct approach. I quietly slipped out of bed, careful not to disturb her, and made my way to my study. My fingers, steady and precise, moved across the keyboard, navigating the labyrinthine pathways of the company's network. I had noticed a recurring pattern in Richard's login times, a specific window late at night when he would often access certain confidential files from his home office. It was a habit I knew well, as I often did the same. But tonight, I wasn't interested in his files. I was interested in something far more personal, far more revealing. With a few keystrokes, leveraging a subtle vulnerability in the system that I, as a senior architect of our network security, was intimately familiar with, I bypassed the usual protocols. The screen flickered, then resolved, displaying a familiar interface. She had no idea I'd already logged into her email. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Would you have stayed quiet too, or exposed them right there? Let me know in the comments below. The glow of Sarah's email inbox illuminated my face in the quiet solitude of my study. It was a portal, not just into her private life, but into the intricate web of professional and personal deceit she and Richard had woven. The initial scroll was a blur of names and subjects, but then patterns emerged, stark and undeniable. Not only were there explicit exchanges confirming their affair, rendezvous details, pet names, thinly veiled confessions of their shared contempt for my unsuspecting self, but also a trove of corporate communications that painted a far more insidious picture. There were emails detailing Richard's questionable financial decisions, projects he had greenlit despite clear red flags, and even a series of communications with Sarah where they discussed how to subtly sideline me from key merger negotiations, ensuring their control over the deal's lucrative bonuses. It wasn't just betrayal, it was corporate sabotage, a calculated effort to undermine my position for their mutual gain. My breath hitched, not from pain, but from a surge of pure, unadulterated clarity. The game wasn't just about personal revenge anymore, it was about justice, both personal and professional. My plan, once a nebulous concept fueled by raw emotion, now solidified into a precise, multi-pronged corporate strategy. The first phase involved a surgical dismantling of their professional credibility, executed with the cold precision of a seasoned predator. I started with Richard. As Senior VP, I had direct oversight of several departments, including the one responsible for internal audits and compliance. Leveraging my access, I initiated a routine random audit of the merger project, specifically targeting the financial projections and vendor contracts that Richard had personally approved. I knew from Sarah's emails where the discrepancies lay, where the corners had been cut, where the numbers had been massaged. I tasked a junior analyst, a bright but naive young man named Mark, with the audit, providing him with a carefully curated list of documents to scrutinize, subtly guiding his attention without ever revealing my true intent. Mark, eager to impress, dove in with gusto, unknowingly becoming my first pawn. Simultaneously, I began to subtly isolate Sarah. Her architectural firm often collaborated with Sterling & Co. on various development projects. I, as a key decision-maker, started redirecting new, high-profile projects away from her firm, citing strategic realignment and diversification of partnerships. When she questioned it, I offered vague corporate platitudes about market trends and risk mitigation, my voice calm, my expression unreadable. I also ensured that her firm's existing contracts with Sterling & Co. came under increased scrutiny, demanding more frequent progress reports, stricter adherence to deadlines, and a level of bureaucratic oversight that was both unprecedented and suffocating. Her emails had revealed her firm was already struggling with cash flow, and this increased pressure, this tightening of the corporate noose, was designed to squeeze her where it hurt most, her bottom line. The reactions were swift, though initially they were cloaked in confusion. Richard, a man accustomed to unquestioning deference, began to show signs of irritation. The routine audit of his merger project was dragging on, uncovering minor inconsistencies that, while not immediately damning, were enough to raise eyebrows in the executive suite. He'd call me into his office, his usual booming confidence replaced by a thinly veiled frustration. "Alex, what's taking so long with this audit? It's a distraction. We need to close this deal." I would meet his gaze with an expression of earnest concern, assuring him of my team's thoroughness, emphasizing the importance of due diligence in such a high-stakes acquisition. "Just a few more days, Richard," I'd say. "We want to ensure everything is ironclad. Wouldn't want any surprises down the line, would we?" The subtle implication hung in the air, a ghost of a threat he couldn't quite grasp. Sarah, on the other hand, became increasingly agitated. Her calls to me grew more frequent, her tone sharper, laced with a desperate edge. "Alex, what's going on with the Sterling contracts? My team is drowning in paperwork and we just lost the Horizon Tower bid. Is this about us?" she'd ask, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I would feign ignorance, my voice a picture of calm concern. "Us? Sarah, this is business. The market is tough. Perhaps your firm needs to reevaluate its competitive edge." The coldness in my voice was deliberate, a calculated cruelty designed to make her question everything, to make her feel the ground shifting beneath her feet. She started to suspect, not me, but the capricious nature of the corporate world, the sudden downturn in her fortunes, the inexplicable bad luck. She even complained to Richard, who, preoccupied with his own mounting corporate headaches, dismissed her concerns as overreacting and emotional. The wedge between them, subtle at first, began to widen, a testament to the insidious power of my unseen hand. I watched them, a silent puppet master pulling strings they couldn't see. Richard's once unshakable authority began to fray. The audit, now officially flagged by compliance, was delaying the merger, costing the company millions in potential revenue and market confidence. His reputation, built on decades of ruthless efficiency, was slowly eroding. Sarah's firm was losing bids, bleeding talent, and teetering on the brink of financial instability. The stress was palpable, visible in the dark circles under her eyes, the tension in her jaw. They were both trapped in a labyrinth of their own making, and I held the map. I had become the quiet storm, the unseen force dismantling their lives, piece by agonizing piece. My control was absolute, yet completely invisible. I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of their downfall, and the power of that realization was intoxicating, a cold, precise satisfaction that eclipsed any lingering pain. The final act was meticulously planned, a corporate coup de grace. I had compiled a comprehensive dossier, a damning collection of evidence, the audit report detailing Richard's financial improprieties, the internal communications proving his attempts to sideline me, and most crucially, the irrefutable proof from Sarah's emails, not just of their affair, but of their collaborative efforts to manipulate company resources and information for personal gain. It was all there, laid out with clinical precision, ready to be presented to the board. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, an emergency session called to address the unforeseen complications with the merger. Richard would be there, confident in his ability to charm and deflect. Sarah, unaware of the true nature of the meeting, would be at her firm, desperately trying to salvage a crumbling project. They had no idea that the carefully constructed facade of their lives was about to be ripped away, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Tomorrow's meeting would decide everything. If you were in my position, seeing your plan come to fruition, would you feel satisfaction, or would the lingering pain of betrayal still haunt you? Share your thoughts below. The air in the boardroom was thick with an unspoken tension, a palpable hum of anticipation that vibrated through the polished mahogany table. Richard sat at the head, his usual bravado slightly dimmed, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow despite the perfectly calibrated air conditioning. He still believed he was in control, that this was merely a hurdle, a minor inconvenience before the merger was finalized. He caught my eye across the table, offering a tight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of shared corporate burden. I returned it, my expression a carefully constructed mask of professional concern, my heart a block of ice in my chest. The board members, a collection of seasoned executives and shrewd investors, looked on, their faces a mixture of impatience and mild annoyance at the delay. Then it was my turn. I stood, my movements deliberate, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the silence like a surgeon's scalpel. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, my gaze sweeping across each face, lingering for a fraction of a second on Richard. "I regret to inform you that the unforeseen complications with the merger are far more significant than initially reported." I projected the first slide onto the large screen, a meticulously detailed breakdown of the audit report, highlighting the financial discrepancies, the inflated vendor contracts, the questionable allocations of funds directly linked to Richard's approvals. The numbers spoke for themselves, a damning indictment of his fiscal mismanagement. Murmurs rippled through the room, growing louder as I presented the evidence, each data point a nail in his corporate coffin. Richard's face, initially a picture of indignant disbelief, slowly drained of color, replaced by a sickly pallor as the weight of the evidence crushed his composure. He tried to interrupt, to bluster, to deflect, but his words were weak, his arguments hollow against the irrefutable data. Then came the second phase of my presentation. The internal communications. I displayed a series of emails, carefully redacted to protect privacy where necessary, but leaving enough context to expose the insidious plot. Emails between Richard and Sarah discussing how to manage my involvement in the merger, how to neutralize my influence, how to ensure their mutual benefit from the deal. The board watched in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from annoyance to shock, then to a cold, righteous fury. The betrayal was not just professional, it was personal, a calculated act of sabotage against a colleague, a friend, a man who had dedicated his life to the company. The final slide was a summary, a concise, brutal expose of Richard's ethical breaches, his financial improprieties, and the undeniable conflict of interest presented by his clandestine relationship with a key contractor's principal. The room erupted. Richard was summarily stripped of his duties, escorted from the building by security, his career, his reputation, his entire professional life, reduced to ashes in a single devastating hour. The board, swift and decisive, initiated legal proceedings for fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. His fall was absolute, public, and irreversible. Sarah's unraveling was more private, but no less complete. The news of Richard's dismissal, coupled with the ongoing financial pressures I had subtly orchestrated, sent shockwaves through her firm. Clients began to pull out, contracts were terminated, and her partners, sensing the impending collapse, started to distance themselves. I received a frantic call from her later that day, her voice a raw, desperate plea. "Alex, what's happening? My firm is collapsing. Richard just called. He's been fired. What did you do?" Her words were a torrent of accusations, fear, and a dawning, terrifying realization. I listened, my hand gripping the phone, my gaze fixed on the cityscape outside my office window. I offered no comfort, no explanation, no absolution. When she finally paused, breathless, waiting for my response, I simply said, "Sarah, this is business. You made your choices. Now you face the consequences." And then I hung up. The silence that followed was profound, a vast, empty space where our shared life once stood. Her firm declared bankruptcy within weeks, her professional standing obliterated, her personal life a public spectacle of scandal and ruin. The woman I had loved, the life we had built had vanished, leaving behind only the bitter taste of ashes. I felt no euphoria, no triumphant surge of victory, only a profound, chilling sense of completion. The anger, the pain, the betrayal, they had been transmuted into something else, something cold and precise, a force that had moved with an unstoppable momentum. I watched the news reports, the headlines screaming about Richard's downfall, the whispers circulating about Sarah's firm, and felt nothing but a quiet, almost detached satisfaction. It was not joy, it was the calm after a storm, the stillness that follows a cataclysmic event. The world had been reset, and I was standing in the new landscape, the architect of its reconstruction. Weeks turned into months. I was offered Richard's position, the CEO of Sterling & Co. It was a natural progression, a logical outcome of my strategic brilliance and unwavering loyalty to the company. I accepted, not with pride, but with a quiet understanding of the power I now wielded. My office was now the corner suite, the one Richard had occupied, the one where the scent of Sarah's perfume had once lingered. I had it thoroughly cleaned, every trace of their presence meticulously erased. I often stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the sprawling city below, a vast, intricate tapestry of lives and ambitions. My life had changed irrevocably. The man who had walked into Richard's office that Tuesday afternoon was gone, replaced by someone colder, sharper, infinitely more calculating. One evening, as the city lights began to twinkle below, I took out my wedding ring. It was a simple gold band, engraved with our initials, a relic from a life that no longer existed. I held it in my palm, feeling its weight, its coldness. There was no sentimentality, no lingering regret. Only a quiet acknowledgement of what it once represented and what it now symbolized, the end of an illusion. I placed it gently on my desk, beside a framed photograph of the new Sterling & Comber headquarters, a symbol of my future. I had built a new life, a new empire, from the ashes of their betrayal, and in doing so, I had found a different kind of freedom, a different kind of power. I never raised my voice. I didn't need to. If you found this story compelling, please give it a like.